Once that Readwise export is completed, you will see an entry like this on the corresponding daily notes page. So under the linked references of the day on which you did the export, you will see a list of all of the articles that came over as part of that export. In this particular example, I only had one, so you're only seeing one here. But again, if you had multiple articles or highlights from books or podcasts included in that export, they would all display here under the linked references of the day on which you did that export. What I want to do here is now take a look at the raw output and show you what comes out of Readwise and what does that look like. So I'll go ahead and click on the page that this created. Readwise will create a page for every article or source. Again, source being like book, article, podcast. Every one of those that comes over from Readwise is going to automatically get a page created for it. You can see here at the top that the metadata came over. The structure here was all set by default, and then Readwise automatically populated the metadata fields based on what it knew about the article. You can see that sometimes Readwise is going to do maybe slightly different things than you might do. So for example, this one called the author Nakamoto.com. I prefer to keep the author by the name typically. So I may go ahead and change that to the actual author. So sometimes you'll want to do a little bit of fine tuning here on the metadata. But you can see, generally speaking, that it brings all that metadata over automatically populated. So just really nice, convenient way to do things. The other thing I wanted to point out about metadata here is this line, this horizontal line break that I talked about earlier in this section is a personal preference of mine. This is not a default out of Readwise. This is one of the other very minor modifications that I did do to Readwise. So if I come back over here to my Roam export dashboard, and I'll scroll down just to show you this. So if you're curious and you're feeling a little brave and you want to implement this yourself, literally all you have to do is come to this page metadata section, scroll down to the bottom, and add a new line and add those 3 dashes there. Very, very simple to do. And if you do that, then all of your exports will come over with this horizontal line between the metadata and the rest of the page. Beyond that, there's not a lot to this. So you can see the highlights down here. These are the highlights that came straight out of Instapaper. You can click on this link to open up the article if you want to see those quotes in context. So that's kind of a nice little feature there. When you come back to these later and you want to, again, go see them in context, that's a nice thing to know about. But beyond that, this was a pretty simple process, and this really mirrors my default, my go-to process. And I know many, many people in the Roam community do this as well. So to recap, all we did was came to the article, clicked on the Instapaper Chrome extension, went over to Instapaper, added those highlights, and then exported them through Readwise to get them into the graph. I am a very big Instapaper fan. They've got a great mobile app as well. So really everything I read online, like all of the articles that I read online today, all get saved to Instapaper. And I do most of my reading and highlighting on my mobile app. So highly encourage you to go check that out. I also wanted to mention in this lesson that the method that I showed you with Readwise was a pretty manual method. And if you want to, you can really put a lot of this on autopilot. So if I jump back over here to the import dashboard, this is where you hook up all of the sources that are going to bring those highlights in to Readwise. You'll notice that what I did was manually clicked on Sync Now, which you can do anytime to force those new highlights to come over, but it also will do it automatically. And I believe this happens once a day. So all of your sources that are connected are going to bring those highlights over automatically. And then to recap something I mentioned earlier in the Roam export section here, if I click here at the top, you can set this to export automatically. So between those two things being set, again, you can really put this on autopilot and take your hands off the wheel. So it's going to be totally a matter of your preferences there. The last thing that I want to mention in this lesson is just to really quickly do like a side-by-side comparison of the 2 different methods that we've used. So I'll hit Command U to open up the search bar here, and then I'm going to hold down Shift and hit Return on the other article. And you can see that if I scroll up and down here, the article that we did, or I should say the page that we did manually, looks really almost identical to the page that we did out of Readwise. So I just want to underscore the fact that these were 2 different ways of accomplishing the same exact thing. The only thing that's missing on my Readwise page is this big ideas section where I started to put things into my own words. And then, as you'll recall, I did like a block reference to the original highlight underneath each one of those big ideas. I'm going to go ahead and do that on the Readwise page just to complete this and get these all synced up, but I'm not going to do that on camera. So we'll stop this lesson here. And when we come back, I'll have that all done. and we'll jump into talking about some of the other topics around note taking here in Rome.